Hmm. Hey, dude, did you play Cyberpunk yet?
Oh yeah, I did actually. I did.
Well, what'd you think?
Yeah, I gotta be honest with you. It kind of seemed transphobic or something.
Transphobic? Why?
You know, that's what people on the internet are saying. There's this one ad in the game that's just like really in your face.
But can't you play as a trans character in this game?
I actually didn't really think about that. I just sort of got really triggered by this stupid ad they put in there. So I don't really like that. And so I kind of just shut my mind to the game.
You think that's a good idea for you to do, given that you're a YouTuber who's like a games critic and all that? I mean, shouldn't you maybe look a little deeper before you make some big video?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not going to get that many views, honestly. I mean, at the most, I'm expecting like 50,000, because this is during COVID. So that's actually a normal number for my channel.
Yeah, but what if you get like more? Well, I mean, shouldn't you just make sure this is a really comprehensive review?
Bro, listen, I played the game and I'm telling you, there is no way, mark my words, no way that they are going to be able to fix this with patches. I would stake my reputation on it.
About 5 years ago, CD Projekt RED's much anticipated Cyberpunk 2077 was met with a collective sigh of disappointment. With its standoffish advertising and fairly low quality at launch, yours truly gained a decent amount of viral attention for declaring that patches would never be enough to redeem Cyberpunk 2077. Well, I was wrong, very wrong. I was wrong not only about whether Cyberpunk could ever be saved, I was wrong about fundamentally what this game even is. And now, despite it being long after my mini trilogy of Cyberpunk videos, and maybe well past the point for anyone to care, it's time to revisit the controversial Cyberpunk 2077 with 5 years worth of patches and an expansion pack to its name, and see what exactly I got initially so wrong, and how these years of improvements have helped me to finally see the light. CD Projekt RED are not who I thought, and certainly not the posers that I very publicly accuse them of being. Even though I think many of my criticisms of the game were valid, the Cyberpunk fiasco in retrospect has taught me something, frankly, I already should have known. When it comes to some of the social issues I raised about the game, what I've learned is to never trust a book by its cover. I was incorrect to compare Cyberpunk 2077 disfavorably to Last of Us 2. Though I stand by criticizing how fecklessly the internet tore Last of Us 2 apart, considering its technical quality, I maybe most of all, given my own argument, should have seen that technical flaws aside, Cyberpunk 2077 2 was a game unfairly preceded by its own bad reputation. Even if, admittedly, it released, compared to Last of Us 2, in a much more undeniably unfinished state. The combo of controversy hunting and technical overpromising just made me completely lose trust in this company and this product, frankly. And my older Cyberpunk 2077 videos reflect this. If you promise the moon, you set up your audience to be disappointed, of course. But what I blinded myself from seeing was that this game, first of all, could be saved by years of updates, actually fulfilling some of those promises. Secondly, I did not see that this game, for lack of a better way of putting it, was not made by and for the alt-right or something like that. What I can't believe I missed is CD Projekt RED are very transparently so-called dirtbag leftists. A name for those on the left who dislike so-called identity politics in favor of economic issues. This initially flawed and unfinished game has been perfected in 5 years' time. If CD Projekt RED can fix their game, I can fix my review. Cyberpunk just needed more time. It was a victim of its own unstoppable hype train. What I did not know back in 2020 was that this is the age of the rebound. Maybe games have reached a tipping point in terms of scale when they require a rolling release nowadays. Or maybe content creators like myself are just too quick to take appearances for reality. Either way, my calling Cyberpunk 2077 irredeemably doomed has been proven demonstrably and utterly false. But not only was I wrong to assume patches and polish could never fix this game, I was way off the mark on what this game, at its most basic level, is even trying to say. In retrospect, while proud of my work for the time, I have to admit that in those videos, I was also being pretty gatekeepy, and that's shitty. Gatekeepy and overly protective over the authentic meaning of cyberpunk and the punk ethos, mainly because of a knee-jerk reaction to my fear of the genre of cyberpunk, literally the sci-fi genre that trans people love the most. You know, trans people like the Wachowskis, who made a little movie you may have heard of called The Matrix. Literally the transiest sci-fi genre being potentially subverted by a bunch, I imagined, of Polish, Steve Bannon style, transphobes. Yeah, that idea really turned me off. In reality, Cyberpunk 2077, in terms of the American political ecosystem, is closer, again, to dirtbag leftist content creators like El Chapo Trap House, or even, dare I say, early Futurasound videos. So I think all these things, I just didn't really pick up initially because the fundamentals weren't there. If the fundamentals aren't there, then I can't take seriously what you're trying to say on a deeper artistic level because I keep getting interrupted by things like the police not working and, some of the perks and so forth that you get in the game not really working, as was the case initially. There were just many things that didn't work and do now. Let me also admit that Johnny Silverhand, he just reminded me too much of a caricature of myself for me to appreciate. I realize this entails I am probably a narcissist. I need to admit point blank that I unfairly judged Cyberpunk 2077 in a knee-jerk fashion on the basis of, it not seeming politically correct enough. I didn't realize it at the time, and I'm loath to admit it. That's basically what happened. My heart, I'd like to say, was in a good place, but I got it totally wrong. I'm evidently exactly the kind of critic that Cyberpunk 2077 wants to antagonize, and believe it or not, now I think I actually understand and even appreciate the in-your-face marketing for being so unapologetic. It actually helped me over time to see the light. But what I want to stress is that it took more than just 5 years of personal growth, acceptance, and change for me to get this game properly, more than just seeming to punch down against the most marginalized of the LGBTQ+. It was the combo of apparent derision for trans people, combined with the subpar quality at launch, of course, that led me to lose faith in this project and assume, as I did, the worst. Although you could chalk it up to the inherent complications and problems inherent to communication in the social media age, I think Cyberpunk's rebound success story inadvertently highlights the importance, totally beyond political correctness, and I really want to stress this, of nailing the fundamentals if you want to be properly understood. Do you know why I take Hideo Kojima games so seriously? 1, I'm nuts, but 2, because the fundamentals are always so tight. Sure, MGS most of the time, arguably, was maybe clunky and a little hard to master, but I'd argue that Kojima earns every bit of artistic license, earns the player's benefit of the doubt, so as to leave no topic, PC or otherwise, off limits. That's the artistic license that he earns with those fundamentals. Because fundamentally, underneath whatever he's trying to say, you can pretty much bet that there's going to be a good game there. You may not believe in pacifism or global nuclear disarmament, for instance, but either way, games like Metal Gear can still be masterpieces. Why? Not to beat a dead horse, but because the fundamentals are there. Simply put, there's a give and take when it comes to self-indulgence and artistic license. The more potentially controversial or politically charged your game, I'd say the more polished and perfected that it should be on the basic game design front. Another way to word it is that in 21st century video games, except for maybe in visual novels or something like that, content is rarely a good substitute for form. The two aspects must work side by side, not lean on each other in codependency. Does that make sense? So that equation might explain why it wasn't just a case of Cyberpunk 2077 not being PC enough, for seeming to want to exclude trans people from their genre in the science fiction sort of Parthenon. The content of the launch build wrote a check that its form simply couldn't cash, at least not for me. But it turns out that CD Projekt RED didn't have to change anything about the content, and this is an important point. All they had to do is fix the form. In other words, the underlying game mechanics and system interoperability, which I'll get to later, the basic nuts and bolts. By fixing the form, the content now comes across much more clearly and intelligibly. No political correction necessary. However, not until understanding the themes better, thanks to the clarity brought about by fixing the fundamentals, did the actual artistic reasons for making this game so in your face become obvious to me. Let's discuss the game's 3 biggest themes or subjects of interest to understand the things that 5 years ago I so utterly missed. Cyberpunk 2077 simply put themes itself around at least 3 main themes. First, time compression in the information age. Second, what futurist Ray Kurzweil dubbed in his landmark 2005 treatise, The Singularity. The third and final theme is neoliberalism, which the game sets out to critique. I'll address these themes in turn. Here's something I completely didn't realize first time around. Time compression in the information age is a major theme in Cyberpunk 2077. Why does 2077 resemble in this game 1977? Or for that matter 1987 or 97? Or 67? All at the same time. Why does it seem both futuristic and irrepressibly old-fashioned? Why are all these different time periods and styles coexisting simultaneously? The answer is time compression, and it's a central feature of what it feels like living in the digital age. But you'll remember I once criticized this game for being lowercase c conservative, meaning overly nostalgic and derivative. I failed to remember that the same criticism has been leveled at, well, Hideo Kojima, by people who don't know about the so-called postmodern condition. In our postmodern present, to paraphrase Evangelion creator Hideaki Anno, there are no more new ideas, only remixes. No new paintings, only collage. Cyberpunk 2077's playful approach to compressing all of the late 20th century down into a single schizo continuity is brilliant, not only for demonstrating in a unique way the idea of digital time compression, but also the everything's been done before mentality of postmodernism. Johnny Silverhand, the literal relic, is still alive as data in our head. The same is true in a shallow way of whole eras, whose fashion and slang and music never fade completely from the rearview mirror. The time compression theme explains the things that I initially criticized as old-fashioned about Cyberpunk 2077. Now I understand why references to the Beatles and punk music are here side by side, and why that isn't actually some contradiction. In the information age, as we see with the main plot with Johnny Silverhand, we never lose sight of the past, never lose touch with its ghost. The Beatles still do huge numbers on streaming platforms, for instance, making them, in a sense, competitors with newer bands, as though the Beatles were still playing together. This also explains the retro quality to some of the missions that recalls the heyday of GTA, or how, well, OG-style cyberpunk everything is. But understanding why digital memories never fade takes us to the second theme of the game, the singularity. The singularity refers to the theoretical point looming in the near future. Ray Kurzweil puts it at around 2045, when our biological and artificial forms of humanity and intelligence will merge to become basically indistinguishable. As we see in this game on multiple levels, with the singularity, we'll theoretically be able to reverse aging, live in virtual reality, and even potentially live forever across multiple bodies as copies of digital information. Cyberpunk 2077 vividly imagines how this looming inevitability will and will not allow our species to transcend humanity, will allow the 1% to exploit us in new ways. Its bitter satire serves as a warning of the kind of dark future that could follow if we give corporations so much power in the age of the singularity. Finally, we have Cyberpunk's third major theme, neoliberalism. This doctrine has grown rather unpopular in the 21st century. I would argue that in Cyberpunk, we see neoliberalism presented as a sort of neo-totalitarianism. Neoliberalism broadly is a belief in deregulated capitalism, laissez-faire capitalism, and deregulation. It was born in the 1970s, just as the punk and cyberpunk genres were. In this game's depiction of one possible near-cyberpunk future, neoliberalism is the name of the virus that has eaten away at the heart and soul of humanity while destroying the environment and transforming us from the inside out, all in equal measure. Underneath it all, CD Projekt RED are punks with hearts of gold. What this game does, like Ancestors, which it reminded me of, like the game Final Fantasy VII, or Metal Gear Solid, or of course the movie Akira, is cry and rage and mourn for what our species is doing to itself. Neoliberalism was supposed to set us free and make us rich. Instead, it's created a global structure controlled by the 1%, basically, where the inhumanity, brutality, and competitiveness of our civilization are only becoming more refined and subtle. I think Cyberpunk 2077 makes a pretty good argument through its design that part of this is making us care too much about surface level things when, economic issues perhaps matter more, or at least it could be argued they do. Thanks to the information age, however, we never get to let go of the past. As Orwell said, history has stopped. And Cyberpunk 2077 depicts this timelessness to our ongoing digital society brilliantly, even as it becomes more refined and brutal in secret. Neoliberalism isn't just about deregulation and privatization, though. It also comes loaded with a lot of presuppositions about the supposedly universal instinct towards what might be called the right of self-expression. Except there is no self-expression outside its so-called system. This is how we see neoliberalism and 21st century technology work together in Cyberpunk 2077 to create a covert form of totalitarianism, a corporatism in the age of the singularity that poisons, corrupts, and co-ops everything. But these bigger themes, again, only came through clearly this time thanks to how much better and more polished of an experience I had this time around as V in Night City. I kept thinking while playing Cyberpunk 2077 of the materia system from Final Fantasy VII. The different moving parts and subsystems gradually sync up and interoperate, combining in novel ways that makes each player's V their own. Playing this time as a corpo hacker, I was blown away by all the room for role-playing, all the different life sim stuff, all the different abilities and how they can be used together. Because I played this time around as a netrunner, technology wound up playing a much bigger role in my progression throughout the game. The result has been something familiar in the vein of such classics as Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, or GTA V, and perhaps the Fallout series, yet also something totally unique. Sun Tzu once said knowledge is power. In Night City, knowledge is also technology. There's simply nothing like taking out a whole street crew on the hardest difficulty and absolutely demolishing them with your techno-wizardry. Well, what really didn't sink in for a while that's crucially wrong about my old Cyberpunk videos is when I said that this game, by being generic, is nothing new for the genre. In truth, CD Projekt RED have seen something genius in Mike Pondsmith's old-school tabletop game, something only their top-notch writing and game design could possibly flesh out. So what is it? Well, I went back to classic cyberpunk like Ghost in the Shell, or the Sprawl trilogy by William Gibson. I went back to Akira, Kojima's games, and Final Fantasy VII. And that's when I realized it. As a genre, cyberpunk is already quite repetitive, very samey, and that's part of what makes it so recognizable. The genius of the cyberpunk series of games is it takes this genre and makes it into one thing, and makes that thing your playground. It's like being in every cyberpunk world simultaneously, except in this version, it isn't just in one little scene or one little panel of a manga. It's your journey, your experience. Going along with the singularity and time compression themes, it's like the ghost of cyberpunk as digital information in the shell of this society. So long as it still remains, the digital age will never completely die or become irrelevant. Like everything else, cyberpunk just becomes more pure through advances in technology. But aside from all these major themes, Cyberpunk 2077 is also noteworthy for re-injecting relevance, I would say, into the concept of a hard M for mature rated game. Yes, this game is loud and in your face with lots of blood and gratuitous sex, But I was wrong to assume these aspects were just ends unto themselves. Rather, they are means. The extremely lurid sex and violence actually does make its point pretty clearly. It's amazing how, with a bit of polish and updates, Cyberpunk 2077 just plays like a totally different game, a game where these themes are much easier to see. Cyberpunk 2077 risks alienating LGBTQ plus people, like myself, to make a point. The game is arguing that the language and even practice of social liberalism has been corrupted by what leftists call late-stage capitalism. It turns out, when I think about it, the trans stuff in this game, for lack of a better word, is less anti-trans, which is what I clocked it as initially, and more I think about being anti-late-stage capitalism. I miss entirely the first time around what this game is trying to say about how arguably capitalism perverts and pervades everything, co-ops everything, and tends to boil things down to something soulless, vapid, empty, and sexed up. Something cranked to 11. People are just so utterly miserable in this universe. Their bodies are all they have. And that's also something I didn't really appreciate about the game. I just thought they were using sex in a crass way to sell their game, but no, I think it's part of what they're trying to say about modern society, the 21st century, and the information age. You see in a beautiful way the humanity amidst the dystopia here, because you see people trying to live and all they really own is their bodies, but in pursuit of happiness and the American dream and all these things, they start to like chop themselves to bits and rearrange and add things until they don't even recognize themselves anymore, and then they own nothing of themselves. Everything that's a part of themselves is something they got from a corporation. I can't believe I overlooked that this is a dirtbag leftist game, especially given not only how in-your-face about it the game is, but also given Hideo Kojima's MGS series has struck a similar tone before and made points that, you know, when it was Hideo Kojima, I hypocritically had no trouble recognizing. Cyberpunk has somehow become not only one of my favorite GTA-style open-world crime games, but also one of the best sci-fi games, best RPG, best sandbox game I've ever played. I love all the life sim stuff here, which recalls the early 2000s and games like GTA 3 or Shenmue. But I was completely wrong to say that the game is just completely old-fashioned. The essence of this genre is something that really is refined here and comes through very clearly. You can see, and this is another thing I just completely missed in my review, they are intentionally conservative, lowercase c, by which I just mean Cyberpunk 2077. It's drawing a parallel to 1977. Cyberpunk as a genre was always very heavily influenced by the 1940s, noir. It makes perfect sense, and this is something I just didn't see the first time around, to make it somewhat conservative, because Cyberpunk was a conservative genre. Cyberpunk was very 40s. By conservative, I just mean like looking back nostalgically at the past. And that's what Cyberpunk 2077 does. It looks back nostalgically at the era of Cyberpunk, which was the late 20th century. And in a way, I think it's doing that to make the point that nothing has changed, that we're still in a similar, almost dystopian, it's just getting more and more of the same thing. So all those things that I sort of thought were flaws or bugs are actually features of the game. Even if I think that it was really ironic, given what the game's trying to say, that on the surface it looked so beautiful, but where it really counted, the game, was very impoverished. Elements that I once identified as bugs are really features, right down to the relic in every sense of the word, Johnny Silverhand. I've already discussed my initial issues with him. Once I hated this character, but now, I don't know if it's just because I'm in a better place in my life or what, but I just find him kind of adorable. I can see him as something other than some weird dark mirror version of myself. I absolutely love using smart weapons and tech or laser firearms, alongside hacking into my enemy's head and forcing them to put their gun to it and pull the trigger. As I progressed, I felt V transcend the human-machine boundary as I powered his middle-aged ass up with a rocket jump, rocket punch, and similarly bonkers upgrades and enhancements. Largely playing without a HUD, I was surprised to find the game works really well as a realistic first-person shooter when you want it to, or a tense, high-paced hack-em-up action RPG when that gets boring. When I think about how it is sort of a version of the future as imagined by the past, I realize how wrong I was to call this nothing special and nothing new for the genre. To the contrary, Cyberpunk 2077 reinvents the genre by giving it this degree of sim elements, role-playing potential, and sandbox open-endedness, as well as this much connection with the past. Night City feels like a living, breathing metropolis in ways linear takes on the genre could only dream of. You know, there are brief moments in films like Terminator or Akira that in Cyberpunk 2077 you can stretch out forever, that you can actually play and experience firsthand. So even that just by itself is something very different and very new for the genre, even if it is old-fashioned in the same way that Cyberpunk in the late 20th century was old-fashioned. Cyberpunk 2077 is purposefully retro. Technologically, there's no denying this game would not have been possible from any prior decade. This is a true towering achievement of our time for both the genre and the entire medium. I was being so damn dumb. That's all I can really say. Neoliberalism actually brings me full circle to what precisely I misunderstood so badly the first time around. You see, punk as an ethos, and this is what I couldn't get about this game at first. Punk began as a lifestyle predicated on being whoever you want, dressing and acting however you wanted. Society be damned. I thought that Cyberpunk 2077 was putting people who dress and act however they want in the crosshairs, which to me seemed very anti-punk. The brilliance of Cyberpunk 2077 and its time compression theme is how it implies, even in things relating to sex and gender. The game's arguing that neoliberalism hollows out and consumes even its worst enemies, because in neoliberalism, to quote the title of a great book on modern Russia, nothing is true and everything is possible. Every step towards progress outside the neoliberal version of totalitarianism that this game searingly depicts, we see it gets subverted by the machine into a U-turn and ends up empowering the system instead. The best you can hope for in Night City, much like in Kojima's MGS series, is equilibrium, maintaining the status quo's balance of power. That's what most of your gigs in Night City are all about. But that brings me to another major admission that I have to make. I don't know if it was because I was so close-minded, or because the game shipped in a relatively unfinished state, but what I missed maybe the most about Cyberpunk 2077 is how completely it fulfills the Hideo Kojima game niche, despite, of course, being primarily, if not exclusively, CD Projekt RED's creation. The rhythm to many of the gigs, which involved infiltration, interrogation, and exfiltration, they played out like a typical MGS tactical espionage operation. Even down to, he even sounds a lot like Snake in these sequences. How did I not see this? How did I not recognize the Kojima DNA that's just present everywhere in this game? Well, one answer is that I found the stealth system and quick hacks in the launch build to be broken and unsatisfying, so I just stuck, as I've been saying, to first-person shooting. But if you play as a stealth hacker and former corpo, as I did this time with all of the, patches and updates, Cyberpunk 2077 offers a sci-fi RPG experience that to me is unrivaled in this industry. It felt enormously satisfying to go from a pipsqueak with no gear to a cyber demigod who has 2 hearts, X-ray vision, a tank, and Mega Man's rocket arm to boot. Which I know I already mentioned, but I really like the rocket arm. The way the different RPG systems, under the hood, interoperate in Cyberpunk 2077 is nothing short of a technical coup d'etat, an impossibly layered and rich next-gen title full of depth and replayability that was built on the bones of a game that I completely did not believe in. I was wrong, as I've been saying. I adore all the game's little gizmos and gadgets, not least of all because they illustrate the old adage that, in science fiction, any technology of sufficient advancement may as well be magic. Yes, make no mistake, this is no longer an overly ambitious, hubristic looter shooter deserving of internet notoriety. Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the greatest RPGs, greatest games period in history. So impressive it makes CD Projekt RED's earlier masterpiece, The Witcher 3, look almost tame by comparison. From the jaw-dropping OST, which I didn't mention at all in my initial review, to the head-exploding inclusion since 2020 of a jazz radio station, which really gives the game a needed noir sort of flavor, Cyberpunk 2077 is also musical in ways I've never seen before, not even from Rockstar. For instance, when you go from listening to music on the street to in a car, there's a subtle change to how the music sounds that emulates the way that speakers sound in your ear versus in a car stereo. There are lots of little touches and attention to detail moments that give the game a ton of polish, again far beyond what I so incorrectly first believed possible. Sci-fi is best when it has something to say. And in this, Cyberpunk 2077 beats out all other games of this type for its intrepid commitment to what it has to say, critics like me be damned. Even if, of course, Outer Worlds comes pretty close, which was sort of a masterpiece in its own right, critiquing neoliberalism. I'm glad CD Projekt RED did not back down from their artistic vision. And in the future, I'm going to wait to play a game of this scale at least 70, 80 hours or so before attempting that kind of review again. One of my biggest influences as a virtual essayist is the old punk critic Lester Bangs. He got some takes wrong too, but Bangs never shied away from correcting the record when he saw the error of his ways. I can only hope that by emulating his example, I can keep alive another tenet of punk, which is never to take yourself too seriously. In my earlier video, I mentioned the old slogan, kill your idols. Well, I was the one who needed to kill my idols, namely my own bias, preconceptions, and needless gatekeeping. Cyberpunk 2077 wasn't actually the problem. I was. This time around in Night City, I played as a character that just fit the game better. Instead of prioritizing guns, this time I was a netrunner, and I'll say that was the right call. I love how much room for role-playing there is now, for many different possible Vs. There are so many awesome clothes, cars, new apartments. The writing in this game, because all the fundamentals are there, it really shines through. It's not getting in its own way as much as it used to. It's not like some big joke, and you can take it seriously, and when you really see what's there, there's a beautiful, amazing game underneath all those imperfections that they've ironed out. Police react properly. I mean, they're still a little bit less on your ass than in something like GTA, but it's a nice system where you have this window of time to get out of the area, but then if they locate your vehicle, it becomes a chase. They've added a lot there. Enemy AI is less brain dead. Guns and cars feel amazing and varied. And again, I think I just should have played as a more techie hacker type character the first time around, given the genre. I kind of regret just going for guns as my main focus. I haven't seen a Cyberpunk T-pose in years. Frankly, I was a little disappointed. I mean, I think that they've really shown me, like, they've pulled off a game that in some ways I prefer to GTA 5. And in that review, I said that I laughably, in a way, called them an indie studio and said that there is no way that they could, like, ever make a game as polished or as good as a Grand Theft Auto. I mean, it may not be quite as polished as I'm sure GTA 6 is going to be, but Cyberpunk 2077 wound up being a much more playable, a much more, dare I say, of a masterpiece than I ever thought possible when I played it 5 years ago. Role-playing as a weak, middle-aged former corpo with years of experience as a hacker gave my experience some much-needed variety and RPG qualities. Shooting no longer became this generic and repetitive thing, since my build allowed for a more diverse playstyle. I had to use my head more. Brute force a lot of the time is just out of the question, so you have to rely on hacking and tech and drugs and clever things like that. This juxtaposition also between who I am in the game's IRL versus who I was wielding all of its tech wizardry as a netrunner dovetailed beautifully with the split personality idea so inherent to the main plot with Johnny Silverhand. But that brings us to what was one of my main gripes first time around. Keanu Reeves' character, like I mentioned, who bugged me mainly because he reminded me of all the things that I dislike about myself. I'm already living the life of someone with an annoying, overly butch edgelord rocker in his head vying for control, okay? Cyberpunk 2077 becomes about what for me until fairly recently was unthinkable, embracing a dialectic between both extremes of one's personality. V and Johnny Silverhand have to come to work together in ways, again, this time around just seemed so much more transparently indebted, in a good way, to Hideo Kojima games like MGS5. I don't know how my defense mechanisms and narcissism were strong enough to keep all this from getting through, considering I'm, the Kojima guy. But yeah, Kojima's influence is not only everywhere in Cyberpunk 2077, the guy makes a literal cameo. Apparently Koji Pro even helped with some of the writing for the game. So when you think about scenes like when you escape the hotel with Jackie, or gameplay moments like dueling a cyber psycho, begging you to hurt him more, it just seems painfully obvious that Kojima's influence has been a part of Cyberpunk 2077's development all along. I'm sorry that I'm yet again talking about myself, but unfortunately, because I'm addressing my old review, that's just the nature of this. In that review, I think I let little things, like the game seeming to depict certain types of people as literal Frankenstein's monsters, or things like, certain female enemy NPCs seem to cry the R word while under fire, all the energy that the game puts into triggering libs. Well, it worked. It triggered this lib, who didn't maybe realize how painfully out of touch as a lib he was. As far as my relationship with Johnny Silverhand goes, the process of writing Shock and Awe, my MGS rock opera, made me remember that rock music and terrorism as ethoses go hand in hand. Part of punk, arguably, is the idea of shocking the audience, shocking the masses to wake them up. And that's why Cyberpunk 2077 goes so damn far making its point. The same could be said in a way of what I was trying to do with Shock and Awe. Not that I'm entirely happy with how that turned out, but that's the story for another day. Johnny Silverhand won't win any awards for how he treats people, but I was wrong, and again, even narcissistic, to project my problems on this character, and by extension, this game. The truth is, Johnny Silverhand wasn't the actual problem. I was. Replaying this game now, I see that pretty clearly. It's an understatement to say that, like Death Stranding, Cyberpunk 2077 has only grown in relevance exponentially in the 2020s. We have a literal CEO as president, and tech bros now basically run the world, ironically including this one, who missed the point out of desperation to make memes so badly, he actually made Cyberpunk single-handedly much more true to life by bringing to market the hideous so-called Cybertruck. Those who have said all along that economic issues matter most seem to be pretty vindicated by the disastrous results of the 2024 election, even if I would say people largely voted against their own self-interest. That election is something out-of-touch liberals, like I hopefully used to be, still struggle to understand. Playing this game might help them understand, provided that they aren't as turned off by it as I was the first time around. What's made the game's in-your-face attitude easier to digest isn't just a changing socioeconomic environment. I want to stress this. It's also all the various detailed ways that CD Projekt RED have overhauled this game, fixed its problems, and addressed its shortcomings. I can't believe that I didn't notice all the references to, the high price of healthcare or anti-US gun culture stuff or stuff about climate change. Yeah, this game is clearly not made by the alt-right, and I'm actually embarrassed that I let the, rather rage-baity advertising distract from what this game is actually about. I should have given it more of a fair chance. And for that matter, I'm not even inherently against the game being made by a right-wing person. I just thought that the way that they went about marketing it, whenever they so under-delivered, it just felt very sleazy. And it felt like they were banking on the anti-trans stuff to just get support from their fans, no matter how crappy of a state the game was released in. I just think I was probably overly harsh. And as some of the devs have even said in interviews, I guess it just became cool for a little while to hate on the game. I really don't like that I contributed to dunking on these guys when they were going through such hell. It was an absolute train wreck. And I was just disappointed, like I think a lot of people were. But stepping away from it for so many years, I don't know if it's just that the game has improved so much, or if I've grown as a person, or maybe it's a little column A, a little column B. A lot of the game's systems have been reworked and made easier to understand also, so that now more than ever, Cyberpunk adapts to your specific character's playstyle. As far as RPG elements go, I found this pretty innovative. Who hasn't wasted points in an RPG on skills or abilities that in practice you don't actually use? In this game, the more you play a particular way, the more experience that you gain, which unlocks more and more little buffs and benefits that make you more of a badass at that thing. Speaking of badassery, guns and weapons and vehicles, I've already said this, but they feel so damn great now, and they've added so many things mechanically, so many little mechanics that you can get through abilities and stuff, and things like vehicles with guns on them, and like slow-mo mode like from GTA. It's amazing all the things they've added. Like I've already played the game for 40, 50 hours over again, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of some of this stuff. What really enhanced my experience was trying to minimize use of force, yet staying open to improvisation. There's just quite a lot that clicked for me about Cyberpunk 2077 this time around. When the fundamentals are tight, I argue only then do you gain the creative license to go as insane and sort of in your face as they tried to go with this game. The creator's artistic intent has to be able to come through clearly, as it now does much better. In this awful world that we see in the game, humanity is desperately just trying to live. All people really have left that's their own, as I've already said, is their bodies, their sexuality, their diet of drugs. Yet ironically, it's in those ways that they're the most attached to the system and its dehumanization. This is far from the alt-right anti-trans shitpost that I initially thought. This is, in all but name, a dirtbag leftist masterpiece that, like a great album perhaps, only gets better with age. There might be something to the idea that fans were pressuring them to release the game hell or high water. I would say that that would be partially because of the hype that they themselves sort of built for the game by putting out, let's just call it what it is, misleading trailers. But it seems nowadays, it's not just Cyberpunk, even if it's a very extreme example of this. Nowadays, games in general, especially big ones, they don't really seem to coalesce into their final form for even years after their initial launch. That's why we players have to be patient when a big project like GTA 6 gets delayed. The rebound success story of games like Cyberpunk 2077, or to a lesser extent, something like No Man's Sky, or even, Death Stranding Director's Cut, demonstrates now more than ever that we should avoid the mistake that I made 5 years ago and never judge a book by their cover. Until next time, Chum.